And from 2016, I have moved to a good home. I leave behind the ice house. Dan Andrews would rather I lived with an ice addict, and that you should too. For some, at the moment, the sex party has more credibility. From 2015. Spying on Hitler's army, the secret recordings MI-19 in World War II created listening posts for POWs they believed knew things worthy of interrogation. They had a large staff of German speakers who transcribed the recordings. The recordings were not divulged at the end of the war, but were kept for Cold War advantages. So many who confessed to war crimes on tapes were never brought to book. However, it is now clear that it was not solely Nazis who committed war crimes against Jews in particular, but regular army as well. Fascinating to hear the transcripts of the divided loyalty of POW generals of the German army. To hear one officer say they used to command Stauffenberg and wished he'd used a bigger bomb was telling. To hear the atrocities again and to feel helpless about how they unfolded, to hear the regret of those involved, is to know the evil of jihadism must be stopped. And it is not solely the jihadi that is complicit with the evil perpetrated, but the wider impotent Islamic leadership and enabling left. The budget reply by Bill Shorten. Shorten is disappointed with the budget and says he will not pass any cut. Shorten promises to do what the ALP did not do the last time they were in government, pass tax cuts and spend on infrastructure. Shorten recognizes the need to cut spending, but will do so by spending more on education and health. Shorten does not distinguish between the budget measures now and those that are planned for the future. Promised spending by the Australian Labor Party in the last government is considered binding by Shorten to this government, and so planned extra spending that is shelved he views as cuts, which harms families now. Shorten opposed the funded plan by Abbott in the last budget for maternity leave, and opposes the end of double-dipping now. Shorten refers to bracket creep and claims it will indefinitely sustain the budget when it clearly doesn't. Shorten wonders about jobs for the future and skills they require. Under Shorten, Australia won't have money in the future to fund health, education, or welfare. Prince Charles's private letters to public figures are irresponsible and inappropriate. It is okay for a private citizen to raise issues privately, but for the Prince of Wales to do so should mean that there is no privacy to the letter. Were the letters to be private after Charles signed them, then the public figure becomes subject to blackmail. The only way to ensure that public figure is not being leaned on is to have the letter public so as to maintain transparency. If Charles does not recognize that, he must be stripped of any title making him heir to the throne. On this day in 1264, the Battle of Lewes, Henry III of England was captured and forced to sign the Mise of Lewes, making Simon de Montfort the de facto ruler of England. It is difficult to like Henry III. He was the son of King John and a bigot. Henry fleeced the Jews of England to pay for his inadequate rule and even passed a law to force Jews to wear badges. Simon's victory at Lewes was partly because Henry's son, Prince Edward, had been successful in battle and left the king's flank to pursue fleeing soldiers and exposing Henry. Henry signed away many powers to Simon, who did not long enjoy them, losing in the Battle of Evesham his own life and that of his son. In 1610, Henry IV of France was assassinated, bringing Louis XIII to the throne. Henry IV had been raised as a Protestant but became Catholic. He had ended the civil war between Catholics and Protestants in France. Francois Ravaillac was an hysteric Catholic who believed Henry was going to fight the Pope. So he stopped his carriage and jumped into the carriage and knifed Henry between the ribs, killing him. Francois Ravaillac was tortured before being dismembered. 1643, 4-year-old Louis XIV became King of France upon the death of his father Louis XIII. Louis's death by TB on this day in 1643 happened 33 years after he had come to the throne on his father's assassination. Louis had endured 7 years with his mother as regent before executing many of her followers and pushing her into exile. In 1929, Wilfred Rhodes took his 4,000th first-class wicket during a performance of 9 for 39 at Leighton. He's the only player in history to have reached that number.